The day Victoria Hartwell torched my great-grandfather's corn barn, she had absolutely no idea she was standing across from federal judge Marcus Sterling, the man who'd sent an entire county commission to prison for a combined 23 years. I'm standing here at 5:47 in the morning, my boots crunching against charred timber and twisted metal that's still radiating heat. The air, God, the air is thick with this choking cocktail of burned oak, century-old corn dust, and diesel fuel that coats your throat like ash. Victoria thought she was just eliminating an eyesore that hurt her precious property values. What she actually did, she handed me a federal case so airtight it would destroy not just her, but the entire corruption network she'd been feeding for years. This smiling HOA president made one catastrophic error. She Googled retired judge and figured I was some harmless old man who'd just roll over and play dead. She never bothered checking my specialty: dismantling corrupt officials who abuse power for profit. Before we dive into this absolutely wild journey of justice, let me ask you something. What would you do if your HOA president burned down the barn your great-grandfather built with his own two hands? The same hands that earned a Purple Heart defending this country? If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA tyrant, or if you've ever dreamed of serving ice-cold justice to someone who wronged you, hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and buckle up. Because what you're about to hear is one of the most satisfying revenge stories you'll hear all year. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I guarantee half of you have a Victoria terrorizing your neighborhood right now. Let's get into it. My name is Marcus Sterling, and 3 years ago I thought I was done sending people to prison. 27 years on the federal bench teaches you a lot of things. How to spot a liar from across a courtroom. How to read body language like it's written in neon letters. How to recognize corruption from a mile away, even when it's wrapped up in expensive suits and fake smiles. But after watching my wife Catherine lose her brutal, heartbreaking battle with cancer, I figured it was time. Time to find some peace. Time to reconnect with the land. Time to honor the legacy my grandfather Sean left me on 47 acres in Riverside County, Iowa. Sean Sterling. Man, let me tell you about this guy. He arrived from County Cork, Ireland, back in 1948 with nothing but Purple Heart shrapnel still lodged in his leg, and hands that knew how to build things that would last forever. Not just last, I mean endure, survive, stand tall through decades of brutal Iowa winters and scorching summers. That corn barn went up in 1952. Every single beam hand-cut from Iowa oak. Every joint fitted so perfectly tight you couldn't slide a dime between them. 70 years later, those weathered walls still held the sweet smell of dried corn and the ghost of his pipe tobacco, mixed with that particular scent old wood gets when it's survived generations. I moved to that property thinking retirement meant simple things: restoring tractors, growing corn, maybe drinking coffee on the porch while watching the sunrise paint the fields gold. I wanted that bone-deep silence you only get when your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away. What I didn't expect, that quarter-mile to be packed with 847 identical McMansions called Riverside Heights, all controlled by a woman who could teach Machiavelli lessons in ruthless power plays. Victoria Hartwell didn't just run the Riverside Heights HOA. She owned it, like her personal kingdom, her fiefdom. Picture this: 5'6" of razor-sharp authority wrapped in designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Always clutching a clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. Her pristine white Mercedes matched her bleached smile perfectly. And when those stiletto heels hit pavement, tick, 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 they clicked out a rhythm that sounded exactly like a countdown timer. The woman had weaponized suburban conformity. See, Victoria sold real estate for a living, peddling these cookie-cutter homes to young families who never bothered reading the fine print about what their HOA could actually control. Meanwhile, her husband Derek ran the county's biggest construction company, which meant between them, they had more influence over local building permits than the actual county commissioners. It was like watching a medieval monarchy, except instead of ruling from a castle, they commanded their empire from a strip mall office decorated with motivational posters about community standards. Here's the beautiful irony that would become Victoria's downfall. My property sat smack in the middle of their kingdom, but completely outside their control. Grandpa Sean had been smart enough to lock down agricultural exemptions and mineral rights in the county records back when HOAs were just a gleam in some developer's eye. Legally speaking, Victoria had as much authority over my land as she did over the International Space Station. But apparently, nobody had bothered explaining property law to the self-appointed Empress of Suburbia. Her first royal visit came on a crisp September morning while I was coaxing my grandfather's old John Deere back to life. The throaty rumble of that diesel engine always brought back memories. Sean teaching me to drive when I was 12, his calloused hands guiding mine on the steering wheel, his patient voice explaining how to feel the machine, not just operate it. I was elbow deep in the carburetor, breathing in that familiar cocktail of motor oil and morning dew, when I heard those heels start machine gunning up my gravel driveway like incoming mortar rounds. Mr. Sterling. Her voice had that particular real estate agent quality, honey poured over razor wire. I'm Victoria Hartwell, HOA president. We need to discuss your agricultural structures. She stood there in her cream Chanel business suit, staring at my freshly painted red barn like it had personally insulted her bloodline. The morning sun made those walls glow like something out of an American Gothic painting, which they were, really. A genuine piece of Americana that had been feeding families since Harry Truman was president. I wiped diesel fuel off my hands with an old shop rag, taking my time. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice friendly but firm. I appreciate you stopping by, but that barn's been grandfathered since before your development was even a wet dream in some contractor's mind. Her smile tightened. Not a lot, just enough that I could see the muscles in her jaw flex. Mr. Sterling, property values in our community depend on maintaining certain aesthetic standards. That eyesore is visible from 17 homes, and frankly, it's destroying everyone's investment. The diesel settled into its steady heartbeat behind us. I could taste autumn in the air, that crisp hint that meant harvest season was coming. I understand your concern, I replied carefully, but this is private agricultural property. Your HOA has exactly zero jurisdiction here. That's when her mask didn't just slip, it vaporized. Her eyes went dead, flat, like a shark's eyes right before it attacks. And her voice dropped to this whisper that somehow carried more menace than any federal sentencing I'd ever handed down in my entire career. Mr. Sterling, there are many creative solutions to problems that affect our community's prosperity. I do hope you won't force us to explore them. The way she said creative solutions made my old prosecutor instincts start screaming like alarm bells in my head. Victoria's first creative solution arrived exactly 1 week later in the form of Daniel Cooper, Riverside County's code enforcement officer. Daniel showed up on a Thursday morning driving a county pickup that looked like it had survived the apocalypse, clutching a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets. Mr. Sterling, his voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. I've got some, complaints here about potential code violations on your property. I set down my coffee mug, the one that said, I survived 27 years of federal court and all I got was this lousy retirement, and walked over to where Daniel stood shifting his weight like he desperately needed a bathroom. The morning air carried that sharp October bite, mixed with nervous sweat rolling off him in waves. Poor bastard looked like he was attending his own execution. What kind of violations, Daniel? He flipped through papers with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Well, there's been anonymous complaints about noise ordinances, dust control, potential rodent harboring, improper storage of agricultural equipment, septic system concerns, environmental hazards. His voice got smaller with each item. I'd seen enough terrified witnesses in my courtroom to recognize when someone was being squeezed hard. Daniel, how many complaints came in this week? 14. The word fell out like a death sentence. 14 anonymous complaints in 1 week. About a farm that had been minding its own business since Eisenhower was president. Daniel's Adam's apple did a nervous tap dance. Look, Judge, sorry, Mr. Sterling. I know this stinks worse than a pig farm in August, but I've got twin daughters starting college next year, and certain people with influence over county contracts have made it crystal clear that thorough enforcement in this area would be career-enhancing. The way he emphasized thorough enforcement told me everything I needed to know. Who's applying this pressure, Daniel? He glanced around like snipers might be hiding in my cornstalks, then pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. The screen showed a voicemail transcript. Daniel, this is Victoria Hartwell. The Sterling situation requires immediate and comprehensive attention. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining community standards. Derek's company has several county projects coming up for bid, and we value working with cooperative officials. Holy shit. She just handed me a smoking gun with her fingerprints all over it. My old prosecutor brain fired up like a cold engine hitting premium gas. 27 years of dismantling corruption networks had taught me to recognize patterns. And this had all the subtle elegance of a mob shakedown. Daniel, quick legal education. You familiar with Iowa's Right to Farm Act? He shook his head like a confused golden retriever. Iowa Code, Chapter 352, protects agricultural operations established before surrounding development. It specifically prohibits local governments from using nuisance ordinances to harass pre-existing farms. I gestured at my barn, literally older than both of us combined. Every single complaint you just listed falls under nuisance ordinances, which means they're illegal harassment of a protected agricultural operation. Daniel's face went whiter than fresh snow. Are you telling me these complaints are illegal? I'm telling you that whoever's coaching you either doesn't understand agricultural law, or they're gambling that you don't. I started photographing his clipboard with my phone. Mind if I document this educational opportunity? Jesus, Judge, if Victoria finds out I let you. Daniel, my courtroom voice could have stopped a charging bull. I'm not your problem here. But someone is using county resources to conduct a personal vendetta against protected agricultural property, and that makes you an unwitting accomplice to official misconduct. The poor guy looked like someone had just told him his lottery ticket was a fake. What the hell am I supposed to do? Simple. Do your job honestly. File your report noting that all complaints involve activities specifically protected under Iowa agricultural exemptions. Take photographs documenting normal farm operations. Follow the law instead of following orders. That evening, my phone rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. Some people are predictably punctual even in their threats. Mr. Sterling. Victoria's voice could have flash-frozen hell. I understand you've been interfering with legitimate community enforcement activities. The woman had balls the size of Iowa. I'll give her that. Miss Hartwell, I've simply documented your systematic abuse of county resources for personal harassment. Personal harassment? Her laugh could have shattered glass. Mr. Sterling, you're clearly struggling to understand how civilized communities function. People who insist on being difficult neighbors often discover that their problems tend to multiply exponentially. And there it was. Another threat delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for abuse of power. Miss Hartwell, I replied, letting 3 decades of judicial authority leak into my voice. I think you're about to learn that some people's problems have a way of becoming everyone else's solutions. The silence that followed was so cold I could practically hear her brain calculating whether she'd just bitten off more than she could chew. But Victoria wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Her second wave of creativity arrived 10 days later. A lawsuit filed in Riverside County District Court demanding immediate demolition of my structurally dangerous agricultural facility and $50,000 in damages for diminished property values and severe emotional distress. I sat in my kitchen reading this legal fiction while my morning coffee went cold, and the sheer audacity made me laugh until my ribs hurt. After 27 years of seeing frivolous lawsuits, this one was a goddamn masterpiece. Victoria's lawyers claimed my 70-year-old barn posed an imminent threat to community welfare and was attracting vermin, vagrant activity, and potential terrorist concealment opportunities. Terrorist concealment opportunities. In a corn barn. In Iowa. But the letterhead told the real story. Blackstone and Associates, a Des Moines firm that charged $800 an hour to help developers steamroll rural communities. This wasn't some local attorney grabbing quick cash. This was big league legal firepower that cost more per day than most people's annual salary. Someone was betting the farm to get rid of my barn. Literally. Time to dig deeper. I started pulling county property records, and what I found made my blood pressure spike. Over the past 18 months, 3 different shell companies had quietly purchased every piece of agricultural land within 2 miles of Riverside Heights. The purchasing agent listed on every single deed? Hartwell Development Solutions, LLC. The registered address? Derek's Construction Company office. They weren't just eliminating an eyesore. They were assembling a 1,000-acre development empire. And my 47 acres sat right in the middle like a stubborn splinter they couldn't remove. Time to call in federal-grade legal backup. My old law clerk, Jonathan Park, had gone on to become Chicago's most feared civil rights attorney. The kind of guy who made corrupt officials wake up in cold sweats. Judge Sterling, please tell me you're calling because someone was stupid enough to violate your constitutional rights. Jonathan, someone's using county government to steal my land, and they just filed a lawsuit so ridiculous it belongs in a legal comedy show. Within 72 hours, Jonathan had filed a motion to dismiss for lack of standing, plus a federal countersuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 that would make Victoria's legal team soil their expensive suits. But the real game-changer came when I called in a favor from an old friend. Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI, White Collar Crime Division. Judge, that HOA situation you mentioned? It just became a federal priority. We've been tracking a systematic land fraud operation across 6 Iowa counties. Rural property owners getting harassed into distress sales, usually to shell companies connected to local officials. Let me guess, I said, wiping grease off my hands. The targets are elderly farmers, veterans, and minorities. Bullseye. And the harassment pattern is identical every time. Anonymous complaints, frivolous violations, expensive legal warfare designed to force quick sales. Your Victoria Hartwell just earned herself a federal investigation file. The autumn air suddenly tasted like victory. I took a reconnaissance drive through Riverside Heights that afternoon to see what $50 million of suburban conformity looked like. The development was a monument to creative bankruptcy. 847 houses that looked like they'd been extruded from the same architectural Play-Doh machine, each sitting on its regulation quarter-acre with lawns trimmed to HOA-approved specifications. I parked my beat-up pickup, complete with faded Vietnam veteran bumper sticker and rust spots that gave it character, right in front of Victoria's house and took a nice, leisurely survey of her domain. I was admiring her psychotically perfect landscaping when a neighbor approached like he was sneaking through a minefield. 30s, pushing a stroller with one hand and gripping a coffee cup with the other like it contained liquid courage. You're the judge with the barn, right? He glanced around like Victoria might rappel from the rooftops. I'm Luis Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you for fighting back. That woman's been turning our lives into a bureaucratic nightmare for 2 years. What kind of nightmare, Luis? $80 fines for leaving our basketball hoop up past sunset. Violation notices for parking our work truck in our own driveway. Apparently it compromises neighborhood aesthetics. She tried to fine us $400 because our daughter drew hopscotch squares on the sidewalk with washable chalk. The exhaustion in his voice was palpable, like someone who'd been ground down by years of petty tyranny. Have you documented these violations? Luis let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Judge, I've got enough of her violation notices to insulate my attic. My wife says we should frame them and call it modern art, the systematic destruction of the American dream. I handed him my card. Luis, would you testify about discriminatory enforcement in federal court? His face lit up like I just offered him a winning lottery ticket. Judge, I'd crawl through broken glass to testify against that woman. Half this neighborhood would throw a parade if someone finally took her down. Victoria's third act of creativity came in the form of good old-fashioned sabotage. It started with my electricity going out at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Not unusual for rural Iowa, except it happened again Thursday, then Saturday, then every few days after that. The power company kept apologizing for equipment failures and routine maintenance, but somehow these failures only affected my property. Then my water pressure dropped to a trickle. The county claimed there were infrastructure issues in my area, but Luis called to let me know his water was flowing just fine. Thank you very much. But Victoria's masterstroke was the anonymous letter to the editor of the Riverside Gazette, published on a Wednesday morning while I was trying to coax my generator back to life. The letter, signed only as a concerned neighbor, painted me as a dangerous recluse who was stockpiling suspicious materials in my barn and exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior toward community members. The smell of diesel exhaust from my backup generator mixed with the crisp November air as I read this creative fiction over my morning coffee. Apparently, I was now a potential domestic terrorist because I owned farm equipment and had the audacity to tell an HOA president to go pound sand. That same afternoon, while checking my security cameras, I spotted something interesting in the footage from the night my power went out. At 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before the outage, a white Mercedes had driven slowly past my property line. The license plate was crystal clear in my infrared camera. Hoken 1. Victoria's vanity plate. She'd been scouting my property in the middle of the night, probably looking for the perfect sabotage opportunity. But if Victoria thought a few power outages and some small-town gossip would break me, she clearly hadn't done her homework on federal judges. We don't break. We build cases. The phone calls started coming that evening. Neighbors I'd never met, all with their own Victoria horror stories. Mrs. Lynn, an elderly widow from Maple Lane, called to tell me about the time Victoria fined her $200 for hanging laundry outside. Apparently, clotheslines were inconsistent with community standards, even though they weren't mentioned anywhere in the HOA rules. Thomas Patterson, a veteran from Oak Street, got hit with violation notices every time he parked his motorcycle in his own driveway. Victoria claimed it was commercial equipment, even though Thomas used it to commute to his job at the VA hospital. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Victoria targeted anyone who couldn't afford to fight back. Elderly residents on fixed incomes, working families with kids, veterans trying to rebuild their lives. Anyone who looked like an easy mark for her power games. But the most disturbing call came from Luis Rodriguez again. "Judge, I need to tell you something." Victoria approached my wife at the grocery store yesterday. She told Maria that it would be unfortunate if my immigration status came under federal scrutiny. My blood pressure spiked. "Luis, are you a naturalized citizen?" 20 years ago, Judge. I've got the certificate framed in my living room. But Victoria doesn't know that, and she's betting I'm too scared to find out what kind of trouble she can cause. That threat crossed a line from harassment into something much more serious. Threatening to weaponize federal immigration enforcement against a U.S. citizen for personal revenge wasn't just abuse of power. It was a federal crime in itself. Agent Martinez called the next day with an update. "Judge, what I'm about to tell you is going to make your day. We just got approval for electronic surveillance on the Hartwell organization. Turns out your little barn drama is connected to a multi-county conspiracy involving municipal officials, development companies, and systematic civil rights violations." The pieces were falling into place like a well-constructed prosecution case. While Victoria was playing amateur hour sabotage games, the FBI was building a federal racketeering case that would put her away for decades. Victoria's desperation revealed itself 3 days before the monthly HOA meeting. She showed up at my front door at exactly 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by County Commissioner Frank Sullivan, a man whose belly strained against his suit like a sausage about to burst its casing. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Frank and I would like to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our community situation." I invited them into my kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the lingering scent of charred would drifting through the windows. What I didn't tell them. Agent Martinez's surveillance team had wired my entire house, and every word they spoke was being recorded in crystal-clear digital quality. Commissioner Sullivan settled his bulk into my grandfather's chair and got straight to business. "Judge, we understand you've suffered some property damage recently. The county would like to make this right." Victoria opened her briefcase with the precision of a surgeon, pulling out documents that made my eyebrows raise. "Mr. Sterling, I'm prepared to offer you $400,000 for your property. Cash. 30-day closing. No inspections or contingencies. For $100,000. for land worth at least $1.2 million. They weren't even trying to hide that this was a shakedown. That's very generous, I said, keeping my voice neutral while my phone recorded every word. But I'm not looking to sell. Commissioner Sullivan leaned forward, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a confidential whisper. Judge, between you and me, there might be some administrative complications if this property dispute continues. Tax assessments, environmental inspections, infrastructure requirements. These things can get expensive very fast. Victoria nodded sympathetically. What Frank is saying is that we have the ability to make your legal problems disappear. That federal lawsuit, the insurance claims from the fire, all of that could be resolved very quietly if we can reach an understanding. Holy shit. They were offering to obstruct federal justice in exchange for my land. And if I don't accept this generous offer? I asked, pouring myself more coffee with hands that stayed perfectly steady despite my racing pulse. Sullivan's smile had all the warmth of a January blizzard. Well, Judge, county government has many tools at its disposal. Building inspections, septic assessments, tax audits. These processes can be very thorough when public safety is at stake. I let them talk for another 20 minutes, documenting every threat, every bribe attempt, every abuse of official power. They laid out their entire corruption network like a PowerPoint presentation, complete with details about which county officials were cooperative and which federal investigators might be redirected with the right political pressure. The best part? When Victoria explained that my attitude problem was affecting property values throughout the county, and that selling to them would be my patriotic duty to support economic development. Apparently, letting corrupt officials steal your family land was now a form of civic service. After they left, I called Agent Martinez immediately. Rebecca, I just recorded a sitting county commissioner offering to obstruct federal justice and an HOA president attempting to bribe a federal witness. Please tell me you got all of that. Every beautiful word, Judge. We've got enough evidence to charge them with conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of office. Your little coffee meeting just became the centerpiece of our federal case. At 3:17 a.m., I jolted awake to the smell of smoke. I looked out my bedroom window to see an orange glow where my grandfather's barn used to stand. The structure that had weathered 70 Iowa winters, that had sheltered 3 generations of corn harvests, that had survived the Dust Bowl and the farm crisis of the 1980s, was burning like a Viking funeral pyre. I stood there in my pajamas, watching 70 years of family history turn to ash and char. And I felt something I hadn't experienced since my first day on the federal bench. That cold, focused fury that comes right before you destroy someone's entire world. Victoria Hartwell had just made the biggest mistake of her life. While the fire department was still hosing down the smoldering remains, I was already making phone calls. The first went to Agent Martinez, who answered on the second ring despite it being 4:23 a.m. Federal arson of a veteran's heritage property. I told her, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through my veins. I've got security footage, I've got motive, and I've got enough evidence of conspiracy to put this entire operation away for life. Judge, I'm driving to you right now. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone except federal agents. And for God's sake, don't do anything that might compromise the prosecution. The second call went to Jonathan Park. Jonathan, they just burned down my grandfather's barn. I want to file a federal civil rights lawsuit so comprehensive it bankrupts everyone involved down to their grandchildren. By 8 a.m., my dining room had been transformed into a federal war room. Agent Martinez arrived with 2 other FBI agents and enough evidence boxes to stock a small library. Judge Sterling, she said, spreading files across my grandmother's oak table. What you've uncovered connects to our broader investigation in ways that are frankly stunning. Victoria Hartwell isn't just running a local scam. She's the Iowa hub of a multi-state land fraud network. The FBI's surveillance footage from the barn fire was damning. They'd identified 3 separate vehicles in the area between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., including Victoria's Mercedes and 2 trucks registered to Derek's construction company. Judge, Martinez said, showing me enhanced footage on her laptop. We've got them dead to rights. Vehicle identification, cell phone tower pings, even chemical residue analysis that confirms accelerant use. This isn't just arson. It's a federal terrorism charge waiting to happen. Luis Rodriguez organized a secret meeting in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church. By Thursday evening, 47 Riverside Heights residents had shown up with documentation of Victoria's harassment campaigns. Mrs. Lynn brought a shoebox full of violation notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. Thomas Patterson had photographs of Victoria's people measuring his grass with rulers to find violations. Jennifer Walsh had recorded phone calls where Victoria threatened to have her children removed by social services for inadequate yard maintenance. "Judge," Luis said, standing in front of the assembled group, "we've all been living in fear for years. Some of us were afraid to hang our flag outside on Veterans Day because Victoria said patriotic displays were politically divisive. She made us feel like prisoners in our own homes." The documentation revealed the true scope of Victoria's operation. Over 3 years, she'd issued 1,247 violation notices to 187 different families. The average fine was $312, but the psychological damage was immeasurable. People were selling their homes and moving away rather than deal with her constant harassment. The Riverside Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. 437 people packed into a space designed for 200. With overflow crowds watching through windows and a live stream that was already being shared across social media. The air buzzed with anticipation, anxiety, and the metallic scent of too many people in too small a space. I arrived at exactly 7 p.m., carrying my grandfather's charred hammer in a clear evidence bag. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but sometimes the best justice is served without subtlety. Agent Martinez and her team were positioned throughout the crowd, dressed as concerned residents but communicating through nearly invisible earpieces. Victoria called the meeting to order with the confidence of someone who still believed she controlled the narrative. She wore her most expensive suit, navy blue Armani that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and her smile had been polished to courtroom perfection. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," she announced, her voice carrying that familiar edge of authority, "I want to address the recent harassment campaign being conducted against your elected HOA leadership by certain individuals who refuse to respect community standards." The crowd murmured, but not in the way she expected. People were exchanging glances, checking phones, whispering among themselves. Word of the federal investigation had leaked, and the community was primed for confrontation. "Mrs. Hartwell," I said, standing up in the back of the room, "I'd like to address the community about those harassment allegations." Her face went pale beneath her foundation, but she couldn't refuse without looking guilty. "Mr. Sterling, you'll have your turn during the public comment period." "Actually," Agent Martinez said, rising from her seat near the front, "Mr. Sterling can speak now. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, and this community meeting just became a federal evidence-gathering session." The room exploded into chaos, people pulling out phones, reporters rushing forward, Victoria's face cycling through expressions of shock, rage, and dawning terror. Commissioner Sullivan, who'd been sitting in the front row like a loyal lapdog, tried to bolt for the exit but found his path blocked by another FBI agent. I walked to the podium carrying my laptop and a folder thick enough to stop bullets. The crowd quieted as I set down my grandfather's hammer. The sound of charred wood hitting the podium echoed through the suddenly silent room. "My name is Federal Judge Marcus Sterling, retired. 3 months ago, Victoria Hartwell began a systematic campaign to force me off my family's land through harassment, intimidation, and eventually arson. What she didn't know was that she was documenting federal crimes every step of the way." I opened my laptop and projected financial records onto the community center screen. Bank transfers, shell company documents, kickback payments, a financial spiderweb that connected Victoria to a multi-million-dollar land fraud operation spanning 6 counties. Over the past 18 months, Mrs. Hartwell and her associates have used county government resources to target elderly residents, veterans, and minority homeowners for systematic harassment. The goal was to force property sales at below-market prices to development companies she secretly owned. Victoria finally found her voice. "This is outrageous. Mr. Sterling is a disturbed individual who's been stalking and harassing community leaders for months. These allegations are the delusions of someone who clearly needs psychiatric help." That's when I played the recording from her bribery attempt. Her own voice filled the community center, crystal clear and absolutely damning. "We have the ability to make your legal problems disappear. That federal lawsuit, the insurance claims from the fire, all of that could be resolved very quietly if we can reach an understanding." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear people breathing. "Mrs. Hartwell," I continued, "you made one fundamental error. You assumed a retired federal judge wouldn't know how to build a criminal case. You were wrong." Agent Martinez stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from her jacket. "Victoria Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." The crowd erupted as Victoria's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and somewhere in the chaos, I heard Mrs. Lynn shouting, "Finally!" in a voice that carried 70 years of satisfaction. As Agent Martinez read Victoria her rights, I leaned into the microphone one last time. "Mrs. Hartwell, you once told me there were creative ways to solve community problems. Turns out you were right. Though I don't think federal prison was quite what you had in mind." Commissioner Sullivan tried to make a run for it, but another agent was waiting by the fire exit. The community center had become a crime scene, a news event, and a moment of collective catharsis all at once. As federal agents led Victoria away in handcuffs, the crowd began to cheer. Not with malice, but with the pure relief of people who'd been living under a tyrant's thumb for years. Luis Rodriguez stood up in the crowd, tears streaming down his face. "Judge, you gave us our community back." The smell of autumn air drifted through the open doors, mixing with the scent of justice finally served. Victoria Hartwell's reign of terror was over, and Riverside Heights was finally free. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where my grandfather's barn had burned, watching a crew of volunteers raise the frame for its replacement. The morning air carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut oak and the sound of hammers ringing against nails, the same sounds Sean would have heard 70 years ago. Victoria Hartwell was serving 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The plea deal came after prosecutors threatened RICO charges that could have put her away for life. Her restitution payments, $2.1 million and counting, were funding community improvements across Riverside County. Commissioner Sullivan got 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. Daniel Cooper, the code enforcement officer, received probation in exchange for his cooperation. The entire Hartwell corruption network had collapsed like a house of cards, taking down 14 local officials and business owners who'd thought they were untouchable. The best part? Watching Derek Hartwell's construction company get blacklisted from county contracts. The man who'd built his empire on corruption and kickbacks was reduced to bidding on garage repairs and sidewalk installations. Justice has a sense of irony that would make Shakespeare proud. The new HOA board, led by Luis Rodriguez, had implemented radical reforms that became a model for associations across Iowa. Term limits, financial transparency, open meetings, an independent ombudsman to investigate complaints. The reign of petty tyrants was over, replaced by actual democratic governance. Mrs. Lynn had become the community's unofficial historian, documenting every abuse of power from the Hartwell era to ensure nothing like it could happen again. "We were all so afraid," she told me during the barn raising. "Afraid to hang our laundry, afraid to park our cars, afraid to live in our own homes. You gave us the courage to fight back." The rebuilt barn was more than just a replacement for what Victoria had destroyed. It was a symbol of community resilience. Local craftsmen had volunteered their expertise. Veterans groups had donated materials, and families throughout Riverside Heights had contributed labor. What had started as one man's fight for justice had become an entire community's declaration of independence. The legal clinic I'd established in the rebuilt barn was helping rural families across 6 counties fight HOA abuse and municipal corruption. We'd handled over 200 cases in our first year, with a success rate that made my old prosecution record look modest. Turns out there were a lot of Victorias out there, and they all shared the same weakness. They couldn't handle organized resistance. Agent Martinez's task force had expanded their investigation into 12 states, uncovering a nationwide network of development fraud targeting rural communities. The Hartwell case had become a template for federal prosecutors, showing how local corruption could be dismantled with proper coordination between federal agents and determined victims. The annual Sean Sterling Heritage Festival had become Riverside County's biggest celebration, bringing together thousands of people to honor agricultural history and community cooperation. The festival's centerpiece was a scholarship program for agricultural students, funded by the proceeds from Victoria's asset forfeiture. Every year, we awarded 20 scholarships to kids who wanted to carry on the farming traditions that built America's heartland. As I watched the sun set behind the new barn, casting long shadows across fields that would soon be planted with corn, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Catherine's death: complete peace. The land that Sean had claimed with his Purple Heart hands was safe for future generations. You know what I learned from all this? Bullies, whether they wear suits and carry clipboards or run HOAs from strip mall offices, they all make the same mistake. They underestimate people. Victoria looked at me and saw an old man, a harmless retiree who'd just roll over and take whatever she dished out. What she should have seen was 27 years of federal prosecution experience. A man who'd built his entire career on dismantling corruption networks exactly like hers. She thought she was playing small-town politics. She was actually tap dancing into a federal RICO case. And here's the thing about justice: real justice, not the cheap kind you see in movies. It doesn't always come fast. But when it comes complete. Victoria didn't just lose. She lost everything. Her freedom, her money, her reputation, her empire. All because she couldn't resist burning down an old man's barn. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it shows up with a federal badge and handcuffs. If the story gave you chills, if it made you want to stand up and cheer, smash that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president? Or maybe you're dealing with one right now. Drop your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else fight back. And of course, subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people standing up to bullies and winning. Stories about justice prevailing over corruption. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss next week's video, because I'm telling you about the small-town mayor who tried to steal a veterans memorial, and how one determined Gold Star mother brought down his entire administration. Some battles are worth fighting, no matter how long they take. Thanks for watching. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be federal judges.